Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6 says this. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. The first thing I want to focus on today is when he says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. What I see there is all your heart. That means there's no reservations. There's nothing you're holding back. There's no category in your life that you're like, you know what, God, you can deal with all this stuff in my life, but this one thing, I'll take care of it. No, it's saying you're going to trust him in all his ways and in all your ways. Now, it says trust in the Lord. It's not some blind faith where you just say, well, whatever happens, sarah, sarah. It is what it is. Everything's God. No, what it's talking about is trust the Lord. Trust his word. Trust his promises. Trust what he's spoken through his word. Trust what he's spoken to you personally. I don't know what that is, but trusting the Lord with all your heart in those situations and what he's promised you, what he's told you about provision, what he's told you about your future, what he's told you about your healing. Trusting him with all your heart and doing the things that the word tells you to do in regards to those promises. And the next part is lean not on your own understanding. You know, there's some things God is going to direct us to do. There's some things you read in the Bible, you're like, that's probably not the way I would have done it. But then you saw the outcome and you saw the victory in these people's lives as they walked out God's word, not trusting in their own understanding. I'm reminded of a story when I was in missions in Australia. It was my second school going there. I was doing the School of Evangelism, and I remember the year was ending. You were there for 6 months. The school was 6 months. Your visas usually lasted about 7 months. Well, school was ending. I had about a month I could have stayed, and the Lord was directing me to stay in Australia for another month and serve a local church and get involved there and grow in that environment. And I had more than enough money, even though the school was done, the boarding was done, the food was done. I could get myself a place and stay for a month. Pay some rent. Pay for my food. Everything was fine. And I was getting about to that place where school was ending. And I heard the Lord say, I want you to give all your money away to this one individual. And he pointed out that individual. I think he was from Indonesia, and he'd been serving at the mission base for a while. And I'd seen him. I didn't know his name, but I'd seen him a couple times. And the Lord said, give all of it to him. Now, in my mind, I know, hey, my visa, I haven't bought my plane tickets back to America yet, and I have a visa, and if I don't leave this country, all these things started going through my mind. All these things of my understanding. I was like, well, that's not going to work. That's not a good idea. That's not wise. But after about, I don't know how many days of me just wrestling with this, I said, God, I believe you're telling me to do this, and it terrifies me. But I want to be a faithful son, and I want to trust in you with all my heart, and I believe I know your voice. And you're telling me to do this. Now, I don't know where I'm gonna sleep when school ends. I don't know what I'm gonna eat because I don't have any money, but I'm gonna trust you. And I kind of had this analogy that, I'm gonna throw the bread out on the water. And what that meant to me was, I'm gonna throw it out on the stream and just get rid of it to the point where it just flows on and there's no way for me to get it back. So I went down to the accounts office and I said, hey, I'd like to give this amount and put it into this guy's account. And so they withdrew the money from my account, which obviously brought me down to zero. And, here we were, waiting what was going to happen. But I trusted the Lord. I said, Lord, I believe that was you. And you know what's amazing about not just trusting the Lord and what he says, is trusting the Lord in his heart. As you're a child of God and you're saying, God, I'm trying to walk in faith here. He'll meet you. Even if you miss it, his grace is sufficient for you. As long as your heart is good and you're wanting to seek him and trust him, he's going to meet you where you're at. And so the day came where no more bed, no more food, no more money. And I was just being faithful that day to whatever I was doing in the tasks that were before me. And I remember getting a phone call from someone in that church that I was going to be involved in. And we had known them for a while, the family and stuff. I've been working with them. And they were like, hey, Jory, we heard you were going to stay another month. And I was like, yeah, I'm working and I feel like the Lord wants me to stay here. And they said, hey, where are you staying? And, obviously I wasn't like, oh, it was me. I have no idea. I don't know what's going to happen. I just said, along the lines of, it's like, well, I haven't decided yet. I'm still working that out. And they said, you come stay with us. We have a bedroom for you. We have a car for you. So if you need to go to the missions base, you can use the car. Whatever's in the pantry, it's yours. Eat what you need. We want you to stay with us. And sure enough, there I was for a whole month taken care of. I didn't need a penny while I was there. The story doesn't end there though, because the problem is I still have to get back to America when my visa ends. That's $1,000 some to get back to America. Well, God said, don't worry about the money. He said, just keep working on what you're doing here. I've called you to be here at this time to focus on what you're doing. And I did it. I just focused on it. Well, the day he said, you don't need to worry about plane tickets until the day before you need to leave the country. And I was like, oh my gosh, my understanding was going crazy. I was like, this isn't a good idea. In the natural, it was just everything was wrong about it, but I had peace in my heart that this was the right thing to do. So I focused for that month, and I served the church, and I grew, and I had a wonderful time with the church there. Well, I remember sitting in this room at midnight, because God said you couldn't buy a ticket until this day. So when the clock struck midnight, I opened my computer and I was looking at plane tickets, and I've been blessed with a little bit of money over this month from people giving and blessing me and stuff, but it was nowhere near what I needed to buy a ticket that day and fly out of this country. Well, guess what happened? I was just stressing. I was in my understanding, and I was like, Lord, I don't know how this is gonna work. I don't know how this is gonna work. I gotta leave today, and I have no money. And Lord said, check your bank account. I was like, I have nothing. There's no money. Check your bank account. And by the third time, I was like, oh, if I got a little snippy, I was like, hey, don't you remember you told me to get rid of all my money? And I looked at my bank account, and there was more than enough that had been deposited in the last couple hours. I had no idea who had done it. Well, long story short, I was able to go home that day, flew back to America, spent 3 days in Los Angeles with a friend, got to spend time with him, edifying him and spending time with him, came home, found out it was my grandma, who was faithfully every morning. She spent time with the Lord, and she prayed. She was a woman of prayer. She was a woman of the Word, and she was praying that morning. The Lord said, I want you to put this amount in Jory's account today. She didn't know why. She just said, okay. So she went to the bank, and she did it. She didn't know where I was, what I was doing. She just did it. And the time was perfect. I flew home, and God provided more than enough. If I had leaned on my understanding, there was a lot of things I got to experience in that month that were amazing I would have missed out on, because I would have given into fear, given into not trusting the Lord. But that's why I trusted the Lord with all my heart, and I didn't lean on my own understanding. The last part of the scripture I want to focus on is, in all your ways, acknowledge Him. We're not just acknowledging that there's a God. Now that's a great place to start, depending if you're watching this video. It's like, have you ever thought about the reality of God? Have you taken the moment to stop and think? Because I had to do that one time in my life. I remember when I wasn't living for God, I wasn't a Christian. I remember sitting out on my mom's porch. I was looking up into the sky, and out there's no lights, so you can just see the Milky Way. It's just so clear out there. And I remember just thinking about, there's got to be a God. I mean, you look at all this, and I started thinking about all the science I'd learned in school and stuff, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And so then I was totally fine with there being a God, which is a great step. But the next question is what I want to get to is, I had to say, well, who is He? What's He like? What's He got to do with me? And at that moment, I acknowledged Him. And I've been on this journey ever since of growing in the knowledge of who He is. Not just that He is real, but that He is good. He's faithful. He's a provider. He's healed me. He's healed those around me. He is so involved. He is so aware. These things, He's timeless, but He's full of wisdom. How many times I needed things, I needed wisdom, I needed direction, and God gave me sometimes things that didn't make sense to my understanding, but I did them, and He was faithful, and I'm here today because of those things. Moments in my life where God told me not to go left and to go right, but left made sense, and I went right anyway. But if I went left, looking back now, I could have got really hurt, maybe even died. And He is so faithful, and I'm so grateful for that. But I acknowledge Him, and I encourage you to acknowledge Him. What does that mean? Take a moment, wherever you're at today. Maybe it's right now you're watching this video. Stop for a moment. Think about who He is and His reality right in that moment. Think about who He is. If you're in a hospital right now in a medical bed and you're struggling and suffering, guess what? Acknowledge the healer. If your bills are piling up on your desk right now, acknowledge the provider. Acknowledge His reality, His existence in your life right then. Acknowledge where you are. As a Christian, it says that we are seated in heavenly places at the right hand of our Father, right next to Him. We can't be any closer than we are now. We're right there, and realize that He is with me, and the power of Christ is right here in my life right now. And He promises that if you acknowledge Him, if you take that and in all your ways every day, maybe you have to do this 6 or 7 times today. Just stop. You're in the grocery store. Just stop and acknowledge reality of what's really going on, what the Word tells you is going on. Take that moment. If you don't believe in God, take a moment to just ponder the existence and your existence and why you're here. What's the meaning of life? Those things. Take a moment. Stop This is something, I did that when I looked at the universe and I started thinking about acknowledging his existence and that, well, what's his personality like? What's he do? What's he think? What's he want? Those moments, God made a promise in his scriptures in verse 6. He says, and he will direct your path. You're like, I don't really know where I need to go today. I don't know in life. I'm struggling with a decision. He says, acknowledge me and I'm going to direct your path. More real than your wife or your husband, your children. He is more real than the people you're going to encounter today in your work. He is more real than them. Today, stop, breathe, take a moment, take many moments, and acknowledge the one. Trust in him with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. He's going to direct your path today. He's going to get you down that path you need to go. Thank you.